What's up guys and welcome back to Mourning. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology and maybe you're just here because you need to know how Patroclus dies in the Iliad. And that is what we're going to be going into today. So if that sounds like you guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. As you guys have probably noticed, for those of you who've been watching every single episode, or a bunch of them at least, we now have no books next to me. And that's because we're now in mourning. Guys, okay, it's not about the books. It's not about anything. Wear your black. Go and change. By the way, if you're not wearing black, go and change because this is an emotional as book, and I'll be wearing black for the subsequent episodes until we are out of mourning, okay? I will let you know when, as a collective, we can stop mourning Patroclus. But until then, get ready to cry. So, in saying that, let's just dive into the details of Book 16 of Homer's Iliad. So if I could summarize Book 16 into one sentence, it would be Patroclus being a bad man, and then he dies. Obviously, as we all know, this is Patroclus's big moment. And when I say big moment, holy crap, he is a beast in this book. Really, we haven't seen anything of Patroclus, and this is really the only episode in mythology and legend that we get of him, and he really takes his 15 minutes of fame. Like, oh my god, he's so cool. But it is really sad. So you're gonna want a box of tissues, and you will probably want them from this book up until book, I want to say 18, because that's really sad. And then kind of after that, you're kind of used to the fact that Patroclus is dead. But sort of in these books in the middle, you're like... But anyways, let's just roll into the narrative already. So the men on the ships, they continue to fight, right? Because remember, the Trojans want to burn the ships down, okay? So the men continue to fight, and Patroclus runs back to Achilles, as we saw also in the last book that he left Eurypylos in order to go and beg Achilles to go and fight. When he runs into the tents, Patroclus just breaks down crying. Like, he literally goes up to Achilles, breaks down crying, and Achilles is like, Patroclus, why are you crying like a little girl? Like, literally says that, and you're like, come on, Achilles. Like, you could have said anything else. Your man is on his hands and knees crying right now, and you just said that he looked like a little girl. Like, come on. I mean, to be fair to Achilles, he's not making fun of Patroclus right now. That in fact, Achilles is worried that Patroclus is actually crying because he heard news from home. So he's like, is my dad dead? Did someone else die? Like, is there tragedy back in Phthia? Like, what's Phthia? P-H-T-H. I hate that combo. But either way, so back home on the island, he's like, is something going on? Like just tell me what's going on. Patroclus then starts opening up about the tragedy that's happening on the battlefield, right? And he does tell him as well that all of the best fighters are now out of the battle, which is why the Greeks aren't doing so well. So he highlights how Diomedes has been out. He highlights how Agamemnon is out. Odysseus is out, Eurypylos is out. He goes through all of his other heroes. He says that the healers are out because even though Machaon is injured himself, the other healers are out in order to heal these great warriors. So they're really in between just a rock and a hard place at the moment. Like, this is not a good place for the Greeks to be in. And in fact, what he says to Achilles is that Achilles is the only one who could go out there and actually make a difference, and yet he's actively choosing not to in the time when the Greeks need him the most. I'm so glad that Patroclus said this to him, because even though Achilles doesn't really react, Patroclus does say that instead of Thetis and Peleus being Achilles' parents, it must just be the sea that's his parent because of the way that he switched on the Greeks, the way that the tides turn is the same speed with which Achilles has turned on his army. So this is the time when Patroclus begs Achilles to at least let him put on his armor and go out to fight with the Myrmidons. He says, look, I'm not going to try and make you do anything, but at least let me put on your armor so that they at least think it's you, and I'll go out and fight for a little bit just to give the Greeks a little bit of help. Like, we need to do something. Patroclus can't really fathom as to why Achilles won't go out, and he does say that maybe there's a prophecy that he isn't telling him, which then Achilles replies and he says, there's no secret prophecy that I'm not telling you about. The reason why he's not going out there, which he reiterates, is because of the whole Briseis situation, which we know like the back of our hands at this point. He says again how Agamemnon disrespected him, and he says, that's the reason why I'm not fighting with the Greeks, and I will not move until there is fire on the boats and it's coming this way. But he does say that if what Patroclus has said about the battle with all of the great heroes being out is true, then he can go in and fight with the Myrmidons, that Achilles will allow that. And he does note that he hasn't heard the cries of Diomedes or Agamemnon on the battlefield, but he has heard Hector constantly and super loud. So he's like, all right, I at least believe that part of it. I don't know how close the Trojans really are. I don't know how badly the Greeks are really doing, but I do know that the heroes are not there. So even though he tells Patroclus that he can go out into battle, he does specifically tell him not to actually attack Hector. He says, what you're supposed to do, Patroclus, here's what you're supposed to do. Just push all of the Trojans out of the camps and further back to the walls. He says, do that and then stop. Do not attack Hector. Do not try and take Troy, because he says, at least not without him. He says, not until I'm out there with you. Don't even try that, because Achilles is worried that a god is then going to kill Patroclus. So he's worried that Apollo will then come down. Specifically, he names Apollo. So he's worried that Apollo is going to kill Patroclus. And Patroclus is just like, yeah, sure, whatever. As this is going on, we briefly cut back to Ajax. And my man out there is not doing so well. And that's not because he's a bad fighter. It's because he's absolutely exhausted. And Homer does highlight this, that his arm is tired from holding up his shield. That, like, he's sweating profusely. He's trying to attack Hector, but he's also trying to keep the shield in front of him, which we know is massive. It's clearly not an easy task to do. He can barely catch his breath, and you read this little part and you're just like, oh my god, Patroclus has to get out there like now. Like, that's the point of why that's in there, is to show you how much they need Patroclus or Achilles or all of the Myrmidons in this moment. From where Achilles is though, he can see Ajax and he can see that Hector advances and like chops off the top of his spear so that it just sort of like flies off like behind him. And when Achilles sees this, he turns to Patroclus and he's like, yeah, get all the armor on and get out there because they need us right now. So we then see him put on all the armor, he puts on the greaves, he puts on the corset, he puts on the helmet. The only two things that he didn't take from Achilles is Achilles' shield, because the shield is like this very important shield, and also his spear, because those were given to him by Chiron, and they are specifically made for Achilles. No other man can hold them, but he has the rest of Achilles' armor on him. He then turns to Automedon and tells him to get into the chariot, because remember how there's always a double act, so Achilles' double act is usually Automedon in the chariot. Patroclus has him sort of get all of the reins on the horses again, because the horses are immortal. Remember that? Automedon is the only one who really knows how to, like, make the horses go, basically, and make them behave. So while Patroclus and Automedon are doing this, Achilles then goes to the rest of the army to tell them to get ready. Now, when we meet the rest of the Myrmidons, we also know how many boats Achilles brought from Phthia, however you say it, from his home. We know that he brought 50 boats, and on each boat there were 50 men. So there's a lot of Myrmidons there. So he tells all the Myrmidons to get ready, and we find out that there's also 5 leaders underneath Achilles. So Achilles is like the main guy, and then 5 leaders of 5 separate battalions. So leader 1 is this guy called Menestheus, not spelt in the same way as the guy that we had before. 2 different guys. The second battalion leader is this guy called Eudorus. Now, anybody who watches this channel, anybody who has watched my very controversial video where I literally trashed Troy the film, will know that one thing I've been saying for the last 2 years since I watched that film was, who the f is Eudorus? Why would they pick this character that no one's ever heard of? When I started reading the Iliad in this much depth about 8 or 9 months ago, when I was making all these crazy notes and everything, found Eudorus. So Eudorus is the leader of the 2nd battalion, and he's not mentioned. This is literally the only line where he's ever mentioned, but he is the leader, and he is the son of Hermes. They have 409 characters in this book, and yet the movie Troy chose this one guy, the leader of Achilles' 2nd battalion. It's very bizarre, but that's Eudorus. 3rd leader is Cassandros. We then have the 4th leader, which is Phoenix, and then the last one is Alcimedon. So Alcimedon comes up later. I'll mention him then. But those are the 5 battalions. But leading them is Patroclus and Automedon. So they then like ride out ahead, and they're now leading the Myrmidons into battle. Finally, the Myrmidons are coming out of there. As the Myrmidons are riding out, Achilles then goes back to his shelter. Now he does this thing where he opens up a chest, and in the chest is this super special goblet, okay? This goblet is not drunken out of by other mortals, by any man. He, in fact, takes it out and he immediately cleans it with sulfur. He washes it out, and then he pours wine into it. He washes his own hands as well. I forgot to mention that. He does wash his own hands, pours wine into it, and then he looks up to the sky and he like prays to Zeus, right? And he says, you've heard me before, great Zeus, all of this kind of jazz. Have another favor for you. Can you make sure that the Myrmidons push all the Trojans back? And can you make sure that Patroclus returns to me unharmed? And then he pours out the wine, he does this whole thing, and Zeus does hear him. Okay, so Zeus does hear the prayer, except Zeus only grants half of it. So Zeus hears the whole prayer, and he goes, yeah, I can make sure that your army pushes all of the Trojans back to the wall, but this whole Patroclus returning thing is like not gonna happen. Which is unfortunate, because Achilles makes this really grand sort of, display with the pouring out of the wine and everything. And then he goes to watch the Myrmidons ride out into battle from his doorway, because he's still stubborn as hell. We then have an absolutely gigantic battle scene, okay, which I'm not gonna get into. Now, Patroclus does have his moment here. In fact, Homer, there's one paragraph where Homer lists off, I think it's something crazy, like 12 people. And literally just at the end of it is like, and Patroclus killed all of them in succession. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, Patroclus is just a beast out there. He is completely unstoppable, probably because he's been chilling out for like the last week or so. I think like, 16, 17 days. He's just been resting. So now he's ready to go, and he kills a number of them. And bear in mind, he's dressed up like Achilles, so a lot of the Trojans are terrified of him because they think he's Achilles. And so they're all trying to run away from him, and he is, to be fair, giving Achilles a great name because he is just slaughtering the absolute lot of them. But unfortunately, Sarpedon sees this, right? Remember Sarpedon? Remember Zeus's son. So Sarpedon has come back into battle, and he sees Patroclus killing all of his men, and he's like, who the is that? Sarpedon tells all of his Lycians that he's gonna go down and fight this dude because he's not convinced it's Achilles despite the armor being Achilles's. So Sarpedon jumps out from his chariot. Patroclus sees this happen, and Patroclus too jumps out of his chariot. And the pair start like walking towards each other, like ready for battle. And as this is happening, we cut to Zeus because Zeus is so upset because he knows that it's Sarpedon's time to die, right? He tells us like this is gonna be really hard for him to watch because he knows that Sarpedon's destiny is to be killed by Patroclus, which is now, okay? So he says this to Hera, and Hera's just like, yeah, I mean, sucks to suck, but like, welcome to the club. So Zeus then says he doesn't know if he's going to actually save Sarpedon in this moment because he's really struggling, like emotionally, he's really struggling to watch his son die. And so he says that he might go down and save him, and Hera doesn't actually hit him, but in my head, she's like, excuse me. And she does bring up a good point, I gotta say, that Hera highlights if Zeus is to go down and change Sarpedon's fate and change Sarpedon's destiny, then all the other gods will probably at some point end up doing that too. And she's like, then what? Then what is the point of having fate and destiny if all of us are going to go down and constantly change it? So she says the best thing for him to do is to let this whole thing play out. She says, look, just you have to let Sarpedon die, but if you want him to have the biggest privilege, the biggest celebration, and the biggest, like attention for his death, then what he should do is encourage Death and Sleep, the gods of Death and Sleep, who are twins, to go and take him from the battlefield and bring him back to his home so that he can be buried there and have a gravestone and all of that. And so Zeus is crying, like literally Zeus is crying tears of blood in line, what line is that? Line 459. I have it on my post-it note that you can literally read that he cries blood. It's so sad to see him this upset and not mad for once. He's just really sad. And it's all because Patroclus is about to kill Sarpedon. So we cut back down to the battlefield. Patroclus fires the first spear against Sarpedon. However, it doesn't hit Sarpedon. Instead hits his henchman. So Sarpedon's pretty mad. He then tries to fire a spear at Patroclus, but instead Patroclus like dodges and it hits one of Achilles' horses, which like is so uncool, but it wasn't intentional, so we'll forgive him for that. So he then fires a second spear, again tries to hit Patroclus, but it just sort of like goes right over his shoulder, and so he's not actually fazed by it. But it's in retaliation for this, right, for this spear just sort of lobbing over his shoulder, that then Patroclus picks up his own spear and fires it at Sarpedon, and it hits him right in the chest. Like it literally hits him right in the heart. And so there's just no way that Sarpedon is gonna live through this. And in fact, Sarpedon has a moment where he like stops and then just hits the ground, and you're like, in fact, when he falls, he's described as falling like a tree, like a poplar tree, right? So he's described as falling like a really heavy tree, that even when he falls, he has this great power with him, which makes this all the more sad that Sarpedon is dying. And when he hits the ground, he starts clawing at the ground, because that's just kind of like what they do in this book, right? They're super dramatic and they're like, no. But as he's dying, he calls out to Glaucus, right? His like BFF. So he calls out to Glaucus, and Glaucus runs over and he's like, look, Glaucus, it's your time to shine now. And he tells him that he and the rest of the Lycians, they have to fight for him. And so he's like, go out there and do me proud. As Glaucus is literally crying over Sarpedon's body, we then have Patroclus sort of waltz over, put his foot on the body and pull out the spear that's now in Sarpedon's chest. And when he pulls out the spear, it's described as taking his soul with him. So that's sort of when like Sarpedon's soul leaves his body. And it is heartbreaking when that happens. You are reading it and you're just like, you know what? I had a fucking soft spot for this guy. He was tough as hell. He was tough as nails. We gotta give Sarpedon credit, okay? He was a great character. This is a real loss to the book. Like, this is the first time that a main character has died for us in book 16. So we're gonna have a moment. Okay, let's just take a minute of silence all together for Sarpedon. Okay, that's enough. I think we get the picture. Anyway, so Glaucus now, he stands up and he calls out to Apollo because his arm really hurts, right? Do we remember when Teucer hit him in the arm with an arrow? That literally happened. So he mentions that to Apollo. He's like, hey, I'm in a lot of pain. My arm still won't stop bleeding from that time that Teucer hit it with the arrow. So I'd really help if you could just like ease this pain because I'm really sad and I want to fight for Sarpedon. And honestly, this is really important because Glaucus is like, my arm won't stop bleeding and I can't hold up my spear. So like, what were you doing down there anyways? Like, this is a question that I have whenever I read that line. I'm like, so what were you doing up until this point? Like, between getting hit by Teucer and now, because you've been on the battlefield the whole time, Glaucus, have you just been watching? Or what? Either way, Apollo does help him. Apollo heals the arm. He like breathes all this encouragement into him. And Glaucus goes to find a lot of the famous Trojans to tell them that now Sarpedon is dead. So he finds Aeneas, Hector, Agenor, and Polydamas to go and tell them all, you know, this guy's dead. So now we have to protect the body because the Greeks no doubt are going to try and take his armor. Remember, this is a main struggle in the book. At the same time, Patroclus has moved towards the other Greek heroes, the other Ajaxes mainly, to go and tell them that Sarpedon has now fallen. And the way he says is that he says, oh, the guy that first scaled the walls is now dead, which is a nice callback to the fact that Sarpedon, literally a few books ago, he did that. So just to remind you that Sarpedon is the one who got into the Greek camps the first, even though Hector threw the little thing at the lock. Remember when I was talking about that? Maybe not. If not, then the video is popping up in the corner. You should go watch that at some point. But Patroclus highlights that, and then he's like, but now we have to go and fight because we have to go get that armor, and we have to keep pushing the Trojans back, and we have to keep killing them. And so then they all move into battle, and Zeus is described as putting night over the field. I don't know if it's just the mist of night or if it's actually night. So somebody tell me that. I'm not going to tell you that it's a new day because I don't actually know, but either way, moving on with the action. Then there's another big fighting scene. Patroclus kills a bunch of people. There's a really funny moment in this fight scene where Aeneas and not Patroclus, Meriones. So Aeneas and Meriones like face off, but they end up having this terrible trash talk situation where they're like yelling at each other, and Meriones yells back at him, and Patroclus is then close enough to hear Meriones yell at Aeneas, and literally Patroclus is like, what the f*** are you talking about? This is not the time to talk. This is the time to fight, man. Shut the hell up. And I love that. I love these little funny details that are in there where I'm just like, I mean, yeah, I'm glad that someone said it. Like, what was the point of this terrible trash talk? On the Trash Talk on Meter, guys, by the way, you're gonna want to go and read this scene because it is by far like a 2 at best. Anyways, lots of fighting. In fact, Homer does tell us that if you were looking at the battlefield, it would be really hard to see where Sarpedon was because his body is now covered with all of these like shields and things like that. Like basically they're just throwing things on top of him so that the Greeks can't get to him easily. So he's completely hidden pretty much on the battlefield. Now Zeus hasn't stopped watching this, and he actually doesn't know if now's the time for Patroclus to die or if they should keep pushing the Trojans back. He doesn't know which way to go, and after some deliberation he decides it's not Patroclus's time right now. They're gonna keep pushing them towards the walls of Troy, but Patroclus's time will come. So Patroclus is just fired back into battle like a freaking pinball at this point. And because of that, the Trojans are so scared that even Hector is like, F this, I'm going home. Like he literally gets into his chariot and he's just like, nah, this is it, we're done. Patroclus is a madman. And Zeus didn't even get involved with this, okay? Zeus puts temper into Hector without any strength, which is why Hector's just like, nah, tapping out, that's it, so it's done. The Greeks then can move in and take Sarpedon's armor off because that's all they want. And then Zeus sends down Apollo to go and get Sarpedon's body so that he can then have sleep and death, take him back to his hometown so that he can go and get buried there. So that's sort of the end story arc of Sarpedon, that his armor is taken and Patroclus gives it to his companions to take back to the camps because now they're obviously not there. So he has all of his friends take it back, and then the body itself is removed by the gods and sent back to Sarpedon's home. Now, as soon as the body is gone, the Greeks continue to fight strong. This is like a really hard fight to the point where the Greeks have pushed the Trojans all the way back to the walls of Troy. We haven't been here in a while, okay? And Patroclus, again, he's a killing madman. He kills so many people that you're reading it, and it's just like if you were to tally it, genuinely you're gonna get stressed when you do it. And in fact, when he gets to the walls of Troy, when Patroclus himself gets to the walls, he tries to mount one of the towers, and he tries 3 times to do it. And it's said that they would have taken Troy then and there had not Apollo come down and literally been pushing Patroclus away. And on the 4th advance, when Apollo whacks Patroclus away again, he yells at him being like, this is not your destiny. Chill the fuck out. This is not what you're supposed to do. And so because of that, Patroclus does chill out for like 1 second. Now Hector is inside the gates at this point of Troy. So he's inside the gates and he doesn't know if he's going to go back out there or not. But Apollo comes down to him in the guise of this guy called Asius, who is his uncle, I'm pretty sure. So it's his uncle, comes down to him, and he basically encourages him to get back on the battlefield. They have a long conversation. It's not really all that important. All Apollo does is tell him that I will give you glory. There will be glory involved if you go back out onto the battlefield and you fight Patroclus. And so that gives him enough courage to then call on his friend to then come into his chariot and to drive them out and back into battle. Now, after this pep talk, Apollo goes back out onto the battlefield and he starts inflicting confusion among the Greeks. So already they're at a disadvantage because Apollo's like, this is now the time when Patroclus is going to die. So he makes all of them confused as And Hector rides out straight for Patroclus, okay? He's not even looking at anyone else. And so when he rides out, Patroclus hops off his chariot, he has his spear in one hand, and he has a rock in the other. And he throws the rock right at Hector's charioteer. It hits the guy in the head, and it's described as like his head sort of like caves inwards, like the brows go inwards, which is like really gross, and he dies and he falls off. So Hector then hops off the chariot, obviously, because otherwise that's a bit of a hazard. He also can't ride and fight at the same time. So he then hops off onto the battlefield. So now it's just the two men facing each other on foot. This is getting serious really quickly, and I'm not comfortable with it. Now the two men actually initially go to try and take the body off the battlefield. So Patroclus goes and he grabs the guy's foot, and then Hector grabs the guy's head, the charioteer, and then they call in all their friends so they can have this tug of war with the body. And eventually the Greeks win and they take all of the armor off of the Trojan, and he sends it back with a bunch of people back to the Greek camps. Now Patroclus is so riled up by this exchange, though. He's so riled up by being like this close to Hector that he's so frenzied by war. He kills 9 people 3 times. It's described, like literally that's what we're told. So he kills 27 people in one go, which is just crazy. In amongst like 2 lines, he takes the armor off this guy and then just goes everyone else and kills them. I just hit the microphone, by the way. I don't know if you heard that. If not, then we're just gonna move on. Anyways, it is this little frenzy that Patroclus goes through that causes Apollo to then come down and step in. And this is where everything starts going south for Patroclus, and it's honestly heartbreaking. So Apollo walks out into battle, and Patroclus can't see him. I'm literally gonna cry. Like, what is wrong with me? So Apollo like comes out into battle. He has like this whole mist go over the battlefield and all of the warriors. And he comes up behind Patroclus and he like whacks him on the back first and foremost. And Patroclus doesn't really know what's going on. So he gets whacked in the back. I have to pause for 1 second, guys. And then after hitting him initially in the back, he then whacks off his helmet, which is like not okay, because this is like a really important helmet that was given to Achilles by the gods, but Zeus has given Apollo permission to do this. So he whacks off Patroclus's helmet, it hits the ground, and then he breaks his corselet. So it's Apollo that's the one that's literally taking his armor off, because it's the only way that the Trojans will have a chance to kill him, really. And so he then ends up, he ends up taking off his corselet, and it opens up his back to this other guy who shows up. His name isn't really that important, but he shows up and he throws a spear and it hits Patroclus right in the back. Like, center of the back, Patroclus is like pushed forward by this spear. So as Patroclus is on the floor, this guy comes forward and he's too scared to actually like go around and face Patroclus in fighting, because Patroclus is a madman. And so he just takes the spear out and he rides away, and Hector walks forward. In fact, Patroclus in this moment is like panicking so much that he tries to like turn around and he tries to like run back to his friends, or like claw back to his friends, because he can't really get up. And as he's trying to do that, Hector just won't allow him and instead stabs him in the belly with his spear. Like, just goes for it. And Patroclus can't do anything. Patroclus doesn't have any armor on. The gods literally came and took it off him. Like, this is now his time to die. He can't do anything to get out of it. And Hector has this moment where he's just like, you know, I bet Achilles encouraged you to come out into battle and all this sort of stuff. And Patroclus just turns around and he's like, you didn't even get this death. He's like, this death wasn't yours. You didn't kill me. You're the 3rd person to have hit me. It's the gods that killed me, and then your mate who stabbed me. And only you got the last little bit of it. So don't get too cocky about killing me right now. He also informs Hector in this moment that Hector's destiny is coming to an end. Like, he's going to be killed by Achilles because of this. So Patroclus is like telling him all of this. And then he just like dies on the ground, but his soul like leaves and it goes down to death's door. And it's just like this really heartbreaking moment where like Patroclus is just, the way that it reads is almost like the earth just kind of takes Patroclus away. And as that's happening, Hector has this moment of confusion where he's just like, what is this destiny that he's talking about? Like, who's to say that Achilles won't fall by my spear? And instead he just, again, leans over Patroclus and pulls out the spear from Patroclus's body. So now his body is just lifeless on the ground. And the book ends with Hector pushing against the Greeks. And I'm so glad that I got through that whole episode and didn't cry, because it was really close for a second there. So Patroclus's death is a really big moment, okay? That's the end of the book. It's a really big moment. And in fact, it takes up the next 2 books as well. It honestly takes up the next part of the whole story is all because of Patroclus's death. But when you read that scene, like, I can't do it justice. Like, I know I'm quite jokey and I'm quite fun, and then I nearly got emotional there. But like, this death is so important to all of mythology, and this death is such an important moment in the story that I would advise, yes, you can watch this video and it's fine, but it doesn't do it any justice, and you guys should really be brought on that emotional journey with me, as opposed to just watching me like really try to hold back tears, because I'm absolutely ridiculous and overly emotional about mythological characters, even though I know how this is going to end. But either way, so that's what I'm going to leave you guys with, that you guys should go and read this part of the story. Just read book 16. It's very emotional. It's very sad. So yeah. So next week we're going to be talking about book 17 of Homer's Iliad. So tune back in then, and I will be seeing you right here in the same place, but I will have my candle lit because I will probably be sobbing as per normal. So we'll see you guys then.